Okay, and we're back. And it looks like we might want to launch into some of our second week's questions and reading. Some of these questions, just quickly, are what is the relationship between cognition and emotion? We've actually been talking about that quite a bit. Are there elements of higher and lower cognitions and emotions? If so, how are these related? Are these connections structural or functional, and are they necessary? In order to have an emotion, must there first be cognition, such as perception, awareness, attention, etc.? Anna, where would you like to start with that huge area?
I know.
And we could even start somewhere else and come back to that if you'd like.
Well, I'd like to take a look at maybe some of the elements of higher and lower cognitions and emotions and what that means, because I think it would come in well. It would segue in well to what we talked about in the first week.
Sure.
Because in the level in the first week we talked a little bit at the very end about the grossness and the refinement of the breath in view of volition, with the instruction of the concentration on the rose and then the perfume of the rose. Well, if we take that question about what are higher and lower elements of cognition and emotion and relate this to why the Sufi would do certain practices to synthesize these, we would take it to the repetition of certain holy and sacred phrases that vibrationally, with the breath, would have an effect on the atomic system that would benefit the individuals, so that the elements that are connected in the structural and functional aspects of our being would inherently work toward our benefit rather than toward our negative. For instance, if I were to repeat a negative scenario, it would be compulsive and neurotic obsessing, which would break down the capacity for the person to really function in a beneficial way with themselves and others in their families and community, right? We've seen the evidence of that.
For example, anxiety and repeating patterns that if somebody's anxious all the time, their breathing's going to be a certain way, their vibration's going to be a certain way. Right.
Post-traumatic stress is a perfect example of this, of the repetition of certain traumatic events that went on during war. For instance, we see this with our returning vets. Many people who have had caustic experiences in violent situations have had this recur. Anyone in war-torn countries or suffering from starvation, etc., would
coming back from Iraq,
or
in Iraq, living in Iraq,
or Basra at this time.
Basra.
So we're talking about a condition that we know and understand, and it is proven affect the vibratory ability for the functioning and structural aspects to work concurrently together in a beneficial way. We know that there are difficulties that beset the human being. Now, the Sufis take these difficulties very, very seriously and have developed methodologies for developing a refinement or a calming of the cognitive thoughts, and therefore a refining and calming of the emotional system, since we see them as a united force. And also we see this as a refining method of the grosser elements that are working antagonistically against us. So we take the grosser vibrations, which are these hard, pounding, heavy metal sounds that can fracture the vibratory body. As a matter of fact, there's some evidence to this that was done by a researcher at UC Berkeley. His name was Lee Lorenzen, Dr. Lee Lorenzen, who did photography with Imamoto on the message in water. I don't know if anyone has seen this in this class, but if you don't, you should get that text by Dr. Lee Lorenzen and Imamoto on Matsumo Imamoto, who was the photographer. in which they took atomic structures of water from around the world and they played music to it and recited certain phrases, and they noticed it either allowed the crystalline, they froze the water molecule and then they photographed it. It either fractured the water molecule because of the vibration, or it allowed the molecule to intrinsically develop in its beauty and in its light force. So it's a very interesting study proving, since we are almost 70% in the adult body water, in utero we're 90% water, so it proves to us in some dimension that the vibratory system that surrounds us is a very, very important system to our well-being. It can be for our well-being and for our detriment. I mean, a bomb going off will hurt us. They're finding this with whales now. When the Navy are practicing sonar, there's a big thing going on in Hawaii now, a legal suit about the government doing sonar in the waters and killing all the whales.
And just giving permission to keep doing that.
And giving them
this week.
That's right. That's just horrendous. I mean, I'm one who is fighting against that, having had the great darshan of a whale. Darshan is when you see eye to eye. I looked into an eye of a whale. I can't tell you how blissful that was. But anyway, back to the laws of vibration. So the laws of vibration are inherently geared in the methodologies of Sufis, who always use music, mantra, which is repetitive practice of a sacred phrase. And sacred phrases are very, very important to understand that they are not just repetitions of normal words. Sacred phrases have embedded in them certain vibratory components that are very holistically healing to the vibration of the human. And these have been tested over thousands and thousands of years. So sacred holy phrases that are living in the wisdom traditions of the world must be very deeply respected by us and understood very deeply, so that there would be some epistemological and hermeneutic research done on these phrases to really understand the values of them. And they are found in the Sufi traditional teachings due to the work and the research that has been done by the great mystical teachers. They are certainly experimented with, and they have been used over the centuries to help improve the physical body of the person and the physical cognition, the actual cognition and emotion of a person. Avicenna, Ibn Sina, as the Sufis call him, speaks about this in his work on the canon of healing. You will see that he specializes a great deal in mantra practice. So do all Sufis.
Yeah, I was going to say, this reminds me of a phrase in the Quran that I was told by one of our Islamic students, who she said, by repeating this phrase, it's supposed to heal the body. It was a very healing phrase, and to listen to it over and over and over again. And so she would listen to it. And that just reminds me of that tradition.
That's right. That's very much concurrent in Judaism and in Christianity. We have very many beautiful phrases in Christianity and in Zoroastrianism and in the Hindu schools.
Mystical Christianity.
Mystical Christianity has them all the time. Yeah. And music is a very, very important aspect of all of these traditions. They're very, very important. And the chants are a way for the breath to come in a rhythmic refining, so that the vibration would benefit and support the physical atomic system, which I was speaking about in week 1. And that's why, in a sense, we see this as a holistic process, not an isolated process of different bodies. The 3 bodies are seen as united in all these practices and in these methods.
And the 3 bodies, again, are?
The 3 bodies are the mental, the emotional, and the physical body.
Just wanted a reminder.
Yes, right. And
the zikr, would the zikr be considered a mantra, so to speak?
Yes, it is, indeed.
With breath, kind of putting the name of Allah into the heart.
That's correct.
Repetitive.
The most holy of phrases in Sufism. The most holy of phrases is the zikr. And the zikr, for those who have never heard this phrase before, is La ilaha illa Allahu. And what it translates to be is, there is no reality but the divine. There is only that reality. There is only that, the divine. So the breath, so going back to these repetitive phrases, such as the use of the zikr, and in wazifa we call it, which are the sacred holy phrases. In Sanskrit it's called mantra. These are taken into our recitation because it monitors how we breathe. It isn't just a verbalized context, but what it's doing is it's skillfully refining the grosser elements of the breath so that your breath becomes more rhythmic and therefore deeper. Now, the reasons why the refinement, and why I use these two words together, refinement and depth, is because if one would trace the way that the breathing apparatus from a Sanskrit view, from a Hindu view, one would say that we take the air into our lungs, and then the lungs filter the air through neurons, neural networks into the blood, and goes into the body and the heart, etc., and the heart circulates it. But what the Hindu system has told us, and one sees this in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, is that we have what is called nadis at the end of these neurons and of these very, very fine neural systems. And these nadis are very, very rarely filled enough to bring the right oxygenation to the brain and the emotions. And therefore, the atomic systems have a way of crashing and folding down. And thus, many emotional experiences happen is because we're not breathing correctly. Now, the Sufis feel if we could reiterate the unification of breath with supporting the atomic tissue of the physical form, we would not have these emotional and cognitive breakdowns. It's because the body is yelling at us and we're not listening to how to feed it. And there's an ancient saying in Sufism, the Sufi would rather breathe than eat. And that's the reason why that statement comes about. The Sufi would rather breathe than eat. And it's because that to a Sufi, the breath is more important than food itself to nourish the body. And because breath is the true food. And if any of you in this class have ever read a text called The Autobiography of a Yoga by Swami Yogananda, it's one of the really great spiritual texts that have ever been written. He meets a young woman in his adventures who is a breatharian. She has not had a piece of food or water in her entire life. And you must read that section about that. Now, this is a true dervish. This is a breatharian dervish. Now, who believes, and the Sufis believe, that through the air one gets the true food. We can do this.
Have you any flavored air?
Do you have any flavored air? Yeah, there's plenty. Just go behind any diesel truck and you'll get plenty of flavor.
Not that kind. I'll hang out next to trees, thanks.
So for the Sufi, just to finish this thought, the problems that arise, that get in the way, and that we set up a sense of emotional uneasiness or cognitive confusion, are sometimes seen, sometimes, not all the time, because there is no definitive, because no one has the same prescription for everyone. When you work with a beloved teacher who is considered a boon companion, that you walk with joyfulness, because they help you so much as a guide and a guardian of your evolution. They never give the same prescription to the same student again and again. It's always you're new. You're always new, and every moment you're always new. That's another thing how the Sufis prescribe. So one day you go to there's a wonderful old story in Sufism where the student comes to the teacher, and the teacher says, well, recite your practice to me. And the student gives their practice to the teacher, and the teacher says, no, that's wrong. That's the wrong practice. And the teacher says, and the student says, but you gave it to me. And that's it. I gave it to you who no longer exists. And that's an interesting, so there it is. You see, the object of being really in the moment is arising to getting to the issue of ultimate transformation that happens by the very nature of breath, which is the nature of breath is ever changing, ever open, and ever moving the physical atomic form in ways that we have little to know until we practice it.
Manifesting in every moment.
Every moment. And every moment you are shifted. And every moment you are changed. So ultimately...
sounds like Dzogchen, the Buddhism, the moment by moment awareness.
That's right, that moment awareness. And that is what the Mevlevi dervish see when you turn. Because every turn represents the entire transformation of your entire being. And that's what so when one goes to a sema, like the Shevi Arus, which is the sema where we celebrate the Urs of Rumi, which is what we call the wedding day of Rumi, which was when he left this earth plane. We call it the wedding day, because this is the day of the next step of the most important part of his journey. We don't see that as the end. We see that as the beginning of his new wedding, of his marriage. So it's a highly acclaimed and important. But the dervish all spins, recognizing that he is moving to a different plane of his own being every moment. And when he began whirling, he was one person, and when he finishes whirling, he will be another. So in the slight changes in the breath, for instance, in the eyes and in their radiance, even in the postures and the way the hands and the head are held, and give the keys to the complexes and the structure of what the individual is experiencing. So that what we begin to do as Sufis, as brothers and sisters along the path, we begin to experience each other in different ways, because our breath is refining our ability to see, and our ability to read each other in ways that are extremely helpful. So that the impulse, of course, is always altruistic in the heart, is that if I love you and you love me, we will be loving the one that created us. And therefore there is no other place to go. We can only be in the love of each other. So ultimately the object of watching a person, how they behave, and assisting them in any way possible to allow them to fulfill their ideal and allow them to become who they really wish to become, is ultimately allowing myself to be who I wish to become. So that again, as emotion and cognition are united in the being through the Sufi methodology, so is the otherness of another is removed and united in the fabric of the one being who created us. Do you see? It is inherent. It's an inherent epistemological system that is found and abiding in all the wisdom traditions, but well implemented by the Sufis, which was the reason why they were martyred. Because in the times that they were martyred, the individuation, separation of the systems were much more the mode, rather than the uniting of the systems. So just to finish this, the balancing of the breath, therefore, is very corrective to the emotion, cognition, somatic integrity of the being, the balancing of the breath. It would be very helpful for therapists in a clinical setting to begin to look at breath science as an aspect of their learning and their teaching. And luckily at ITP we include very much these esoteric values, in how we treat a human being, which is the reason why the transpersonal is so leading edge and very important for the development of, I believe, psychology in the world today.
Would a Sufi consider a certain breathing pattern to be optimal? I know that, like for example, in yoga, they have different patterns of 4 in, 6 out, 4 in, 8 out, if you want to go on a doubling principle mathematically. Or does it really depend, like you were saying before, on the condition, on the vibration of different aspects of a person, on the different bodies? Then different breathing patterns and mantras would be given.
Everyone will be different. In the Sufi methodology, the inhalation is called uruj, and the exhalation is called nasul. And the point in which the breath rests, at the inhalation there is a top point, that is called kamal, and at the nasul, at the exhalation, there is a down point, and that is also called kamal. Now, these stages in the breath of the uruj, kamal, nasul, kamal, if you were to look it up and down the sushumna, which is in the Hindu system the spine, which is Ida and Pingala, going up Ida and down Pingala, or going up Pingala and down Ida, you'll notice that you'll have breath that goes up and down the spine. That's very much an inherent ancient world system that is studied in yoga very carefully. Having been a yogini for many, many years and practicing that breath, that is a very holistic breath, and it brings great benefit to balancing the emotional and cognitive faculties. Now, depending on every individual's balance, the uruj for some people is more important, the inhalation, where for other people the nasul, or the exhalation, is more important. And then again, for other people, the kamal, or the rest points, are more important, depending on the chemistry and particular nature of the atomic system of that individual. So that is the reason why Sufis believe that one must work with a guide, that a guide is your true boon companion, because they've had years to learn how to read the atomic system and the messages that the atomic system is giving out, and then that guide prescribes the prescription that would best bring that physical being, emotional being, cognitive being into harmony. And once you get into harmony, you're basically there. But it's like a good mechanic with your car. I'm not going to go and fix the motor of my electric Prius, when I don't know anything about how that car is designed. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to go to a well-trained mechanic, and I'm going to trust with my faith and devotion that mechanic will know, and money, and know what they're doing. But I am not going to fix it. So we have to be careful when we think we've read our atomic, emotional, and cognitive systems carefully. Transpersonal psychology teaches us one basic thing, is that we learn how to collaboratively work with each other, because our purpose for each other is to help each other in the most beneficent way as possible. And that's a very, very special community of beings on this planet. And since that is our MO, our modus operandi, we're going to, it's very valuable to have outside expertise and wisdom expertise beside you. You feel less strained, you feel calmer inside, you feel more supported, and you also feel more successful in the endeavors that you have, because you can always receive feedback. So in Sufism, even though many of us have advanced on some level to certain stages of responsibility, because every time you are brought up to be a teacher, it doesn't mean that you're really wearing the golden crown on your head and you have all this privilege. It just means that you have much more dedicated work to do, and you have higher levels of practice to maintain. That's how I see responsibility as being a lineage holder. My responsibility is to keep alive the exigency of these practices. These are my dedicated service to keeping these alive because of what they've given to me, and so then I can pass them on to others who would benefit. So the ITP community is a very special community in the sense that we want our wisdom companions around us. I call them our boon companions. I see everyone here at ITP as a boon companion who is looking at my particular efforts here as chair of the department to do the best I can. Why would somebody want otherwise? Because it will affect them. And hopefully I could do the same for everybody else. So that's the kind of inherent cooperation that I'm talking about that's seen in the methods of Sufism. It's to bring the cooperation of all the systems, of the atomic system, the emotional system, and the cognitive system into integration. And sometimes you need your boon companions around you to do that. So I would not advise, even though these practices can be well developed by the individual, and you can certainly experiment with them, but if you have a boon companion around you, I can tell you you'll learn a great deal more. You'll expand faster.
The reason I ask is I noticed, having worked with a number of people through my spiritual guidance, being trained as spiritual guidance coming through residential, that when doing breathing exercises, there are people who, when they tune in, realize, my tendency is to not breathe out all the way, and that you can go into, what's that about? But helping someone to expand or to focus on, breathe out all the way each time, and then that changes their breathing pattern and allows them to breathe more fully, because if you breathe out all the way, you can take in that much more air, and it changes. Similarly, there's people who don't breathe in all the way, and they don't fill up. And there are similar other principles at work of not wanting to be fully one person, oneself around that. But so I was just wondering, for those at home who are working, if they notice a certain breathing pattern, do you think that it's okay for them to say, I'm not breathing out all the way. Okay, well, I'm going to work on breathing out completely so that I can fill up, or breathing in completely so that I can, or working on not rushing through that top point or rushing through that bottom point, and being able to hang out there.
You're asking a really great question, because ultimately, so long as we see from our limited point of view, we are held in bondage by the way our breath is moving to maintain that point of view. So the object would be is to get a view, you're so right, to get a view of how you're breathing, how you are actually breathing. It's the simplest thing to do. Is my inhalation really short? Is my exhalation really long? Is my exhalation really short? Is my inhalation really long? Do I have a rest in the Kamal state? Do I have at the top of the inhalation of the Sushumna, or do I have a rest at the bottom state? How is my breath moving? The very first foundations of Vipassana meditation practice are breath observation. If you want to become a meditator, and meditation is important to your own development, it's your observation of your breath that's at the core of the practice. And without that, you can't advance. So yes, anybody could do this, but it is when one does it under the guidance of a teacher, one has the alacrity. Am I saying the word correctly? Yes. The alacrity of seeing how to see. Seeing how to see. Because sometimes we see through the bondage of our own breath, being in a limited breath form, if you follow what I'm trying to get at here. Meaning we all have habits in our breath. And so the object of seeing the habits is the reason why one would go into Vipassana training, for instance, or into yogic training, because that's the very first thing you do. Even in therapies now, like the Alexander technique, Pilates, they're all based on breath, exercising with the atomic system. And really, if you take breath out of that, you've taken out the core of the practice.
Yeah.
You've taken out the core of the rehabilitative possibility of that practice, of the Alexander techniques and the Pilates techniques. You've removed the core. So, yes, breath practice is a very functional and important aspect to the inherent development of psychology based through Sufism. There are a couple of other points that I want to just bring to the forefront.
Great.
Which is the true peace of the soul within the atomic body, and the true peace of emotions, thoughts, and even the heart faculties can immeasurably be assisted by coming into full serenity. And that serenity, or that peacefulness, the ability to attune to that sense of peacefulness, the ability to oppose the natural tendencies of our mind to fret and to be stressed and to be physically agitated is how humanity, mankind, humankind, womankind develops mastery and really develops joyfulness in life. And if there's anything more important to the Sufi perspective in this, an understanding cognition and emotion and the effect of both on the atomic physical body, it's that the wish behind the inherent practice is to incur joyfulness in this life. Because with joyfulness, all potential opens up to you. With all the other faculties, there is limitation and depression and sadness. And ultimately, yes, they are teaching to us, they teach us, because we have to overcome them. But ultimately, the aim behind Sufi methodology is to gain this level of joyfulness in life. That life becomes a sterling place you would want to be. You don't want to get out. You don't want to leave it.
Very different from Protestant Christianity that I grew up in, where you work hard, you do your time, so that your afterlife is good.
Yeah.
And you don't worry too much about the suffering you're going through, or the suffering you're going through is building you up for a good afterlife. Right. It's a very different view.
Yeah, it's very much an accommodation of bringing the divine into every cell of the atomic body, so that the body itself, the somatic integration of the physical form, is exalted. And we are living no longer from an isolated identity that's separate from the divine, but we are living in the exalted experience of the divine itself. And so not only do we treat ourselves with utter reverence and utter respect, we treat every living thing, trees, fauna and flora, creatures, everything, and all other beings with the ultimate same respect. So you see, there's truly a holistic epistemology behind this entire system that has been going on for thousands of years and has been proven to be extraordinary due to the effect that it has had on the many communities of the world. And just to leave you class with one sterling example is one of my great idols and deep master teachers. His name was Khawaja Chisti, who is one of the lineage holders of our order, of the Four School Sufism order. And Moinuddin Chisti had this synthesis of integration and developed his students so that they could go out to the world and teach all these other students how to do this integrated work. And in order to build this community, he went out to very much what Mother Teresa did in Calcutta, to the poorest of the poor. He fed everybody, brought them in, and then he began to teach them, and they began to be his utter disciples and dervishes who went around the world and began to disseminate his holy teaching. And the generosity of spirit here to bring the atomic and the emotional and cognitive bodies into full integration with the breath, so that the joy of life would return under the most horrible of circumstances, which is starvation and poverty and homelessness. He proved his point. And he was one of the great master teachers who did it. And he has always been my idol as a Sufi. I've always hoped to walk in his footsteps and to do at least a small margin of his work and continue his legacy. Anyway, he's someone to really look up. Khawaja Moinuddin Chisti. Great, great master. May peace be upon him always.
Are there any other things that jumped out at you when reading through these questions for week 2, or we could launch into week 3 if you'd like?
Let's go to week 3.
Okay. Is there actually, let me reverse it a little bit. Is there any place, rather than going through the questions, any place that you really want to focus on? Something that came out for you?
Well, in three, I can focus it more.
Yeah.
In three, yes.
Sure.
In week 3. You want to go there now?
Sure. Maybe I should hit save just to make sure that we